Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Derek Lambert here, MythVision Podcast. I have Dr. Richard C. Miller joining me today. How are you, Dr. Miller?
I'm doing well, sir. We haven't been on a live stream in a while, and so this is great.
Exactly. Yeah, your book, man, was really transformative. And for those who don't know, I have a personal, friendly relationship with Dr. Miller. We're close. We're like brothers. So he doesn't mind me speaking to him like I would talk to a friend. Okay, it's not as formal, but you better call him Dr. Miller or an abomination is committed. Anyway, you have a wonderful book, man. We need to first shamelessly plug this bad boy for everybody to know. That is actually some of the information we're going to cover. Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity. It's a Routledge publication. This is a very dense read. For those who don't know, you really got to take it sentence by sentence because there's a lot of excellent material in here. And what's really cool about this book here to me, Dr. Miller, is that you have to pause. You have to, it's like beef jerky for those who eat meat. You know, you got to chew on it. You got to really gnaw on it. It took me over a year to fully really wrap my head around some, not even all of it, just some of what you're articulating in here. And you're like, yeah, that took 20 years for me to really, mow over in order to get. And so people aren't embarrassed when they hear this. How long have you and me had our phone tussles about details?
Yeah, no, we've had fascinating conversations back and forth for a couple of years now. What is it, 2-3 years? And yeah, and it's interesting. It's not a closed case in terms of it. Yeah, it's conclusive, but it's not a closed topic. Like there's so much more. And so I invite people that are viewing now, go ahead and read the book. Of course, I'm happy to see that research get out there and find meaning in people's lives in terms of answering so many questions. But just know that there's so much more to explore that's in this line of thought and analysis. And so all I did was just lay the foundation. And so I invite anyone to get into this. And so, Derek, you've brought all kinds of insights to this and we've had all kinds of great productive conversations back and forth.
Thank you. I'm looking at you just so people know. Thank you for being here, everybody. Like the video, share this thing out. Your work was very instrumental on me thinking in different ways. Some of the things I personally love is it's like a mystery that scholars, brilliant minds constantly try to chip at. And then you find new pieces of data, new puzzle pieces that fit. And you're like, how come they're not talking about this? How come this isn't on the equal footing as a hypothesis of what makes sense of the data? And we could talk about, for example, Jesus's death, right? It seems pretty no-brainer. Lots of Jews were killed in real history under the Roman occupation and all that took place there. But it's also a very common mythic trope that a demigod is supposed to suffer a violent death and go through a transformation, right? Is it both and, or is it either or? And why is this not possibly another alternative hypothesis when you are bringing this to critical scholarship? That the missing body, for example, is a well-known legend. This is not historical. And even you flirt with the historicity in ways that I'm like impressed with considering. So we're going to get into some of these details. Dr. Miller, did you want to comment on any of that before we go deeper into the book and help people walk through how to understand Jesus in a new way?
Yeah, I just, just to put this out there, from my standpoint, this isn't even a theory. It's a closed case. And so my analysis, it got me to the point. I started out a Christian, someone who believed in the historical resurrection of Jesus. And through 20 years of very deep research into ancient literature, not studying modern voices, studying ancient writings, I found that this has been grossly misinterpreted because it's been extracted from the ancient world and from its ancient Mediterranean context, and then held as kind of the crowning figure. Jesus is held as the crowning figure of the modern living religion in the West. And so it's completely pulled out of that context and given different kind of signification. And as the result of that, these ties are not made. And so from where I sit in my research, it looks like a gigantic special pleading case, but it's for lack of people being familiar with the ancient world. And so
when I got introduced to your work, thanks to my buddy Derek Bennett, the first thing you do with this book is you start with Justin Martyr. You start with, we believe nothing different. The well-known quote, many people don't, many Christians like to pretend it doesn't say what it's saying, or at least implying what it's implying. And if that was the only quote, before we move forward, then, it's 50-50 arm wrestling on like, what do we do with this? How do we deal with this issue? And before we went live, you're like, let me send you a few quotes. Let me just send you a couple more, because Justin is not the only one who has to address the giant elephant in his backyard and in his front yard and on the side of his house and on the other side of his house and on top of his roof and inside his kitchen. And I'm being funny here to make the point. The elephant is the other demigods, the other gods, the other mythic figures who died and rose again on behalf of people who could participate in this ritualistic mystery within those cultic activities that Pausanias writes about, that you so eloquently expose for the world to consider. And I didn't know if you want to address that before we move in, the Justin Martyr, and maybe cover a few quotes.
Yeah. I don't know if you're able to pull any of that up, but we're happy to look at that with your.
Want me to open up page 1?
Yeah. I kick off the book with this quote, where it's kind of off-putting because I've got it in Greek initially, but then I've got an English translation that immediately follows. And gotcha. For those of you that read the book, for the most part, I think 90% of the time, I do provide English translations for everything. And so I just like to give the ancient text, not to scare anyone away, but just to let everyone know, hey, if you want to research this further, or if you do happen to have ancient language skill, go ahead, dig into that. You can, see how honest I'm being. And so I try to do a very good job with these translations. Shall we read it? I don't know.
Yeah. Did you want to, or would you prefer I do? It's up to you.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. When we affirm, this is Justin Martyr in the turn of the 2nd century here. When we affirm that the Logos, God's firstborn, begotten without a sexual union, namely our teacher Jesus Christ, was crucified, died, rose, and ascended to heaven, we are conveying nothing new with respect to those whom you call the sons of Zeus. Hermes, the interpreting word and teacher of all. Asclepius, who though he was a great healer, was struck by a thunderbolt and so ascended to heaven. And Dionysus too, after he had been torn limb from limb. And Heracles, once he had committed himself to the flames to escape his toils. And the sons of Leda. Is it Leda or Leda?
Leda is fine. Yeah.
Leda. And the Dioscuri, and Perseus, son of Danae, and Bellerophon, who, though sprung from mortals, rose to heaven on the horse Pegasus. For what shall I say of Ariadne and those like her who have been declared to be set among the stars? And what about the emperors who die among you, whom you deem worthy to be forever immortalized, and for whom you bring forward someone who swears, I love this, to have seen, eyewitness, Caesar, once having been consumed by fire, ascend into heaven from the funeral pyre.
Wow. Yeah. So you've got Justin Martyr here. He's arguably the most formidable voice, intellectual voice writer in the 2nd century for Christian origins. And so this isn't a sideline figure. He's an apologist, and so he's marshaling his strongest case for the religion. And what does he have to say? Instead of creating a special pleading case, he creates the opposite of that. He contextualizes this within the ancient world and says there's nothing new, there's nothing different in what's being presented. And that's got to be upsetting to some people who construct their religion a completely different way. Modern apologists are definitely not running with that argumentation. I've never heard one. And so setting that aside, though, why does he have to do that? Well, he doesn't have to do that. It's because that's the interpretation. And notice that he doesn't even make it as an admission per se. It's just an argument in passing, as if his readers already recognize this. In fact, his entire argument is leveraged on it's predicated on the idea that all of his readers already accepted this reality.
Right. That's the important point I think your book does, because by chapter 3, somewhere in there, you give the pipe example and you point out that the pipe is a symbol, and you're naming names I do not remember. You may not even remember. There's so much, right? There's so much you write in this book that's like, it could take years to really dissect and absorb, but that the pipe is symbolic of this visual. And you give this point that when they're playing these translation fable tropes, which we're going to see, this is a nod. This is a nod to what they already understood in their cultural linguistic milieu. So it would be honestly ridiculous if they didn't have him in this period in time, in this place in the world, born with some miraculous deity and a mortal woman. It'd be ridiculous for him not to at least check off, right? There's some of these boxes he didn't have to check necessarily, but like for the most part, you want your guy, if we're using, I don't know, comic books, modern comic books, and we were to parallel, say, I'm using this modern analogy because we understand Batman and Superman. One has kryptonite, one's from another planet. Not Batman, he's from planet Earth. Therefore, they have nothing in common, right? No, they have so much in common, and they don't wear the same suit, and they don't say the same things, but there's enough there to realize that the overarching themes and elements, you go, okay, there's something going on here, that whoever wrote these stories about Batman is reaching into this modern comic book American milieu of fiction and checking off some of those boxes. The only thing I would say is Jesus closer parallels these ancient demigods than even Batman and Superman. And so What do you do with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, so what you don't get in Justin, so he's showing just a sketch of a much larger body of material, and that's the book breaks that out, like literally hundreds of individuals who were translated to divinity one way or another, ascending to heaven, missing bodies, resurrections. All of this is just part and parcel, road encounters, post-mortem appearances, and we'll get into all of that, but he's cracking that open, and with the understanding that all of his readers recognize that larger trope.
Mm-hmm.
And then he even says at the end of it there, he says, and you even bring forth people who, as eyewitnesses to Caesar's ascension after he had been burned, on the pyre, and, clearly dead. Yeah. And these are historical figures at that point. But if you look at the stories around, and these are historians writing the stories around Caesar Augustus. Let's just start with him, for instance. He has a divine birth. He's born of Apollo. His mother is impregnated by a deity in the legend. And this is recorded in actual history works. Dio has this story, and a few others as well. And so, and you can go back there and read it, and it's very similar to the Gospels in that way. You've got a couple that's in love, the interference of the deity in the betrothal and all of this stuff, and then you've got a child that's destined, that all of these kind of omens are placed upon him as it's destined to be great, and he's the son of a god. Okay, and he's called that for the rest of his career. And so, and then at the end of his career, he ascends to heaven with eyewitnesses and road encounters. Livius Geminus meets him on the Via Appia after he had died, Everyone knew he had already died. And then he comes forward and gives a sworn testimony in front of the entirety of the political authorities of Rome, and declares that he had seen him and had a conversation with him. And so had this encounter with him on the road, the most famous road in Roman history. And so this was all front page news. What you get with Jesus is backwater, like your local newspaper kind of stuff. Whereas when you're dealing with Caesar Augustus, you're dealing with the LA Times, you're dealing with the,
New York Times. Yeah,
exactly. Or you're dealing with the top. This is the most high profile figure of Rome, of Roman history at that time, through that period. And so basically founded the imperial period. And so liminal figure. And that's just one person. The Caesars after that were obliged to follow that. But where'd that come from? Romulus. And so we can get into that. So,
and we do have a chart that kind of parallels, but I think we should go through the book before we even show that, about what he checks off, and explain some of this stuff and walk people through some of the characters in your gallery. Because I think that's when it sinks in. Because we could talk about the struggle I had. I can't speak for everybody, is that I didn't know the actual other stories. Yeah. I knew my Bible, but I didn't know like the other stories. And once I started understanding them and the claims made about them, is when it started to dawn on me. Serious. Like it became more like, wow, this is real. Like I was mocked and laughed at comparing New Testament or Bible to other myths, and always thought, nope, this is special. This only one happened and the other ones didn't. We're kind of trained to think that way within a lot of Christian circles. And my world really broadened when I saw these things and went, whoa, why are they doing this? What's going on?
Well, I think there's a phenomenology here that I want to put my finger on. And I think both parties are guilty in the public debate. So you've got Christians championing their story and their uniqueness of it, right? And whatever argumentation goes with that. And then you've got atheists or kind of religious skeptics or whatever on the other side. And there's sort of this like food fight going back and forth between the two groups. Right. You almost have to suspend the tribalistic picture, and just go and sit with the ancient sources. And when you let that actually soak in, no matter which side you're on that,
right?
If you let that just sink in of what's really going on there, the picture comes into view in a way that takes hold of you, and I don't think there's any going back at that point. There wasn't for me. Once I realized that the story is implementing a lot of the same narrative signals, more than any of them really.
We're going to get into that.
Figures, yeah. Anyway, once you see that in all of its detail, you realize, okay, now I understand why Justin's saying what he's saying. Now I know why Arnobius is saying what he's saying. Now I know why Theophilus is saying what he's saying. Now I know why Tatian is saying what he's saying. And you go down the list, all of these figures that the early Christian intellectual leaders are conceding this point.
Should I pull up that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're having to work with it in one way or another because they still want to champion their religion, but it's not on the basis that modern apologists are trying to bring it forward. It's on a different ground.
Remind me to get to, when we get to the Romulus chart, to go into the Arnobius page, because it's right there. I'll probably forget. You did send me a Theophilus of Antioch quote. Should I read that, or should we wait on that as well?
That's Theophilus. And so, yeah, I mean, we could bring it out right now. And so you get a lot of popular, Bart Ehrman had a little thing on resurrection, his case. I have a lot of respect for him. But one of the things he said that I fundamentally disagree, or my research disagrees with, is he said that Jesus was unique in the idea that he rose from the dead. Well, no, he wasn't. We just read Justin, who talked about people raising from the dead, and he gave a little list there. Theophilus gives another list of individuals. He cites, Heracles, who burned to death on a pyre and then ascended to heaven in front of people with eyewitnesses, and with his, and they could not find his remains, and so they declared him to be a god. And yes. Asclepius too, who was struck by a thunderbolt and killed on the spot, and ascended to heaven as well, according to the ancient stories. And so This is again, and there's a whole host of it's often as not the translated figure. This was a post-mortem kind of situation where they had died, and so those are resurrections, by every sense of the term. And so they went on to live. They just lived in a translated divine state and were worshipped, just like Jesus.
Yeah.
So,
thank you, Diamond Encrusted Abdullah. Thank you for that 20. I appreciate the super chat. Allah means moon god in Arabic. Baal is the moon god. Moon is artificial, does not rotate. His angel Gabriel killed Jesus. They are from Andromeda star system. Baal is Zeus, god of Saturn, star of David on top of Saturn, Israel. I don't know how to make sense of all that. I would say that there's probably some characteristic overlaps between characters like Baal and, of course, Zeus. And I think that they're also sharing Near Eastern roots from possibly ancient Mesopotamia as well. But that's a whole nother mythic journey, right? I don't know enough. I've heard people say that Allah is a moon deity. I don't know. I'd need to dive deeper into this. I don't know for sure if Allah is Alat as well, which is the female counterpart. So I don't know enough, man, on this to be able to give you a sufficient answer. This is a statement, though. It's not a question. So I'm just trying to echo my sentiment in appreciation for the super chat. So I really appreciate the love. And then JC says, thoughts on the roots of the first, last first motif as being found in the cuneiform Ezekiel parallel, Ishum and Era. Do you know anything about this?
No.
JC, I think, and just so because you love showing love here with super chats, I would focus more on classicist New Testament stuff if possible, and less Semitic languages, if I'm not mistaken. Wouldn't that be a little bit more in your wheelhouse, Dr. Miller?
I could talk to some of this. So I took all sorts of classes in early Judaism was an area of when I had a whole master's degree in that. But it feels like it's off topic a little bit. So
yeah.
No criticism, just love.
Yeah. So okay, I just figured I'd show some love on the supers before we move forward into the book. And the first thing I think is necessary is showing. I didn't have the screen shared. First, the Translation Fable sub-themes, so people understand what they are. And maybe you want to walk us through that before we go into examples?
Yeah. First, let me unpack what a translation is. So someone's body, this is in ancient time, what would happen is someone's body, this was given for people that were the most iconified figures. And so if you're celebrated in antiquity, the idea was kleos aphthiton, that is undying fame, to live on forever in memory, in song, in writing, in statuary, in legend, in temples. Okay. And so it starts to become in temples is kind of the category here. You've got the most celebrated figures are deified, right? And so how does that happen? Well, they go from having a mortal body to having a divine body. The idea is in the ancient world, they had this duality, this kind of there was that which perishes and that which lives on. And so the immortal and the mortal. And so that paradigm governed a lot of thinking in all sorts of cultural contexts through 1,000 years of history in the ancient world. And so that's where we get the translation fable. That's somebody that's translated. Translated means carried over or carried across. They're born across. And so somebody that's transferred from mortal to immortal. And that means their body has to change because their body is perishable, right? And so they're translated to immortality. And these are the signals in narrative that you're reading a story about someone being translated. And so various sub-themes that recur in countless there's, I don't know, I've counted maybe 200-300 stories in ancient texts, and I was just getting started, but yeah, there's a lot of stories, and most of them, it's easy to find in some ways because you just look at the most famous individuals in the Mediterranean, in classical Mediterranean history and or legend or storytelling, and you find this story pattern popping up over and over again. Oftentimes it was, so this is a cluster, and so it's not in every instance, but many of them have this, right? And so variously you'll see these themes coming up in one story or another. And so in a lot of them, you have a heinous or ignoble injustice, something horrible happens to this individual. And then in the story, though, that tragedy is reversed by having them translated to heaven at the end.
So it's usually a happily ever after, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a bit of a Cinderella story in that way. Things go dark and bleak, and all of a sudden at the end, it's the narrative's redeemed by this individual being set among the gods, and so they're immortalized. Metamorphosis, their bodies change into something else a little different, maybe not recognizable, maybe even into a bird or a tree or someone they don't even recognize, and they oftentimes they can have the ability to decide whether they want to be recognizable or not, and this kind of thing. And so you get this in the New Testament. You also get this with a whole host of other individuals that are translated. The vanishing or missing body. This is probably the most recurring of all of them. Is, in fact, a lot of the legends will have someone it just says that so-and-so vanished, and then on that location where they vanished and literally disappeared, like evaporated, disappeared in front of people's eyes, they vanished. And then a little bit like, what was it, Bilbo in The Lord of the Rings, how he puts his ring on and then vanishes in front of people. A little bit like that. The individual vanishes, and they can't find their remains. And it usually says within just sentences later, and then they worshiped him or her as a god or goddess. And so,
I think there was out of 77 examples you give in this book, 56, if my memory serves right, 56, their bodies went missing. Like, that's ridiculous. You have to imagine that there's something going on with that many missing bodies.
Yeah. So there really isn't another way to get deified in the ancient world. You had to have a translation. And therefore your story had to be dressed up a certain way. So if you wanted to give somebody the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame kind of, significance in the ancient world, put them up in lights, you had to rewrite their story and put some of this embellishment in there one way or another in order to achieve it. You couldn't just let them have a normal tomb and have bones in it and everyone knows, okay, no, we already know Larry died and there's his grave. That wasn't sufficient. You needed the body to go missing, because what would the body mean in perpetuity? That this individual was mortal, clearly mortal, right? Right. And so you needed their body to go missing. And so even Alexander the Great said that he was trying to come off as deified, right? He wanted everyone to understand that he was the son of Zeus. And so at the end of his life, towards the end, the historians record that he was telling people, his closest confidants, that he had this plan to throw himself into the Euphrates River so that his body would go missing, so that he could continue on as a legend, as a deified figure, a son of a god. And so that was his strategy, his little plan.
Isn't it funny that even in the other legends, in a sense, when he's buried in Egypt, his body is still missing? Even when they bury him, they can't find his body now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Empedocles, he's another one, a huge philosopher, threw himself into the volcano on Mount Etna, according to the legend. And the idea being so that he would be worshipped as a god, and they wouldn't find his remains because they'd be disintegrated in the volcanic molten and lava and stuff. And so that was his plan. He was trying so hard. He wanted to be remembered, celebrated, not in some, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people think of it kind of as like vain, I want to be a god or whatever. Right. I think it was more than that. I think they are different than that. I think they just wanted their memory to live on. They wanted to leave an imprint on society. And so we've got a whole bunch of, heck, Proteus Peregrinus, so we can go into that one too, where he throws himself intentionally as a stunt
I
into a
love
big
that.
fire. Yeah. Anyway.
You and me were crying laughing. For the audience, it's such a good read. If you haven't read it, we were crying on the phone laughing at how wordy Lucian is in that story. It's so great.
He's a cynical, he's a satirist, he's cynical, and he's just got this like wit about him that's hilarious. The way he's a wordsmith, even in English translation, it's you can't.
And the dullards, like this guy. Oh, so you're at Eponymous, and just so you know, what we'll do, maybe it might be worth just blasting through some of these so people understand what they mean. But then we'll go into the gallery. Again, get the book if you haven't got Miller's book. And more importantly, if you do purchase the book, Amazon gives you the opportunity to write a review of it. We encourage you, if you've been inspired or whatnot, like go and give him some Hall of Fame glory. Give Dr. Miller a virgin birth and a Translation Fable, because some of them are trying to give feigned translation accounts about this book. They clearly haven't really absorbed what you're saying, but okay.
Yeah. So we'll off-road through these real quick. Eponymous etiology, that's a big language there. All it means is they named a place after the individual. And so kind of like, Paul Bunyan's magic tree or something like that. They named a particular place after this person afterwards. And so that doesn't necessarily mean translation, but often you'll find that in translation legends, a certain place or situation or even a star. We'll see that in the next one, catasterism, naming a star after an individual, that's them in their translated state. So you'd point up to the sky and say, that's so-and-so, Julius Caesar, etc. Post-translation speech. So after they're translated, they give a speech. Oftentimes this recurs in many instances. And so you'll get some sort of communication that goes on there. Ascension to heaven, big one. You've got all sorts of individuals who ascended to heaven in ancient legend in the Mediterranean world, and Jesus happens to be one of them. As soon as you concede that, by the way, I just want to poke it, press a little bit to folks that are still kind of on the fence in terms of what they believe. As soon as you concede that 50 other people ascended to heaven and Jesus was one of them, you're already, if you concede that idea that that's legendary in any way, which is otherwise you got to make this special case, right? That no, this one really happened, even though we've got 50 other individuals in a long lineup of more famous people through that time period that also ascended to heaven in story and history. As soon as you concede that, then I think the discussion just ended, right? I mean, if you either have to take the entirety of the Jesus story as all true, as soon as you pull out one piece of it and say, no, this one's legend, I think the whole thing falls apart then, because it's like, okay, well, you've already admitted that this is happening. And so how do you then argue that God supervised part legend and part raw footage of, real miracles? That case starts to fall apart really quick. And so,
exactly.
Yeah. Post-mortem translation, these are individuals that are translated to heaven after they had died. There's one where an individual, we'll get to them, where they're being carried in the funeral, and they open up the casket in the funeral procession, and the body had vanished, and in its place was left a statue, and it says they worship the person as a god. Let's see here. Translation associated with Zeus's thunderbolt. There's a whole bunch of them where Zeus hits them with his thunderbolt from heaven, and they are destroyed, killed with that, but then also translated to heaven. And so post-mortem appearances, all sorts of appearance legends. And so we can get into some of those, but you get that, plenty of that in the New Testament. Translation associated with a river. Oftentimes the individual either disappears in a river or next to a river, something like this. And so rivers had some sort of association with translated figures that seems to recur in an uncanny way. Mountaintop or mountain translations as well, and so associated with different geological locations. Dubious or odious alternative accounts. In other words, oftentimes you'll get there's two stories. There's the translated one, and then there's this other story that's to be doubted or that's shameful or something like this. And this kind of thing, like they must have stole his body or something like that. Like you get in the New
Right.
Testament where there's all sorts of other stories. There's the story of Romulus where they must have chopped up Romulus and hid his body in the folds of their robes. That's how he disappeared. And so taken up in the wind or the clouds, oftentimes a cloud envelops them or something like this, and then they're whisked away. And then the feigning of translation, we've already talked to that. Individuals who sought to shape their story in such a way that it would line up with this so that they would be remembered as translated as a demigod, and so a son of a god. So
yeah, those 15, is it safe to say these usually help the reader identify when we're dealing with something that we could probably classify in some form of fiction?
Yeah. So I think you have a chart there somewhere. You were showing me page 81 in my book. I've got this, where are all these stories in the ancient? So I've got a whole catalog, what I call the gallery, which is a whole bunch of.
Oh, is it this?
Right now? Yeah.
Okay.
And so those are the sources where you'll find translation legends. And so you could see the ancient writer there off to the left. And then the number of occurrences, kind of the bars off to the right, like how many times do you get a translation legend in this particular writer? And so you could see there that the places where they tend to occur, like look at the top 3, 4, 5. Well, those are Pausanias is recording legends like epichoric local legends and folk tales and this sort of thing. Ovid is a poet who's writing mythographic poetry. And so he's including all sorts. He's the most famous poet, really, of Roman history, really. Maybe aside from Virgil's epics, if you want to include that, but or epic rather. And then Hyginus, again, is writing mythography. And so this is a person that's writing stories that are intended to be received as playful and as fables, as myths. And so the reason why this is important is you see the kind of natural habitat where these kinds of stories tend to live. And it's not in the history work so much. Now, when you get down at the bottom there, you'll see some historians. You got Livy and Hesiod down at the bottom there. He's actually not a historian, but and you've got, let's see, Parthenius, Philostratus. What do you got at the bottom there? Okay. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, clearly a historian. Okay. Mm-hmm. Diogenes Laertius, he's a biographer. And so he's providing a variety of biographies. Cicero, he's a senator for the Roman government. These are fairly serious writers down at the bottom. They're all serious writers, but these are individuals who are writing more sober kind of accounts. But when they come to a translation fable, you'll see they'll set it off with some sort of, they'll partition it by saying, some say that, or there's legends that say that, this kind of thing. And so they show that they're changing the mode of their writing at that point to provide a yarn or a folktale or a myth or something that's to be understood in religious or mythological or legendary terms. And so, yeah.
Again,
so
I love that a lot of these authors are literally at the turn of 1st century BC to 1st century of the Common Era. Like a lot of these authors are literally writing, and you can see how prevalent translation fable is around this period in the Greco-Roman world. It's fascinating.
Yes. And you could see why then, therefore, that the legends around Jesus took off. And, that this was popular. People liked this in their story. This was fashionable wouldn't even be the right word. It was the way that you express excitement about a particular individual, the way you celebrate them in writing. And so
powerful. Okay. I kind of was trying to get to that page, but I figure maybe it's time we talk about a few of these characters and get into a little bit of the details. And for those who are interested, if you have the time, I have a documentary that I did it's all your book. I tried to simplify it. When you do that, though, keep in mind, it's diluted. You cannot get what the book actually says on the same level as what I do with this video. It's a 4-hour, 35-minute documentary. It's enormous. And it did pretty well, 330,000 views in 1 year. I think that's pretty good in getting your work out there to an audience in the world. But in it, we go through some of this, and I only chose, I think, 7, Rick. I think I chose 7 examples to really highlight. But we could go through a few more here. We're not going to be able to go through 77 today.
No. And let me put a little disclaimer on this. I've seen sometimes in comments or people talking online, Miller just wants to sell his book. No, I don't. If you got my book at the local bookstore, at the local library, I'm just as happy. I think I make $1 if you buy the book, $1. And so even if my book were a great hit and I sold like, say, 10,000 copies or something, so that's $10,000. That's nothing to me. That doesn't even pay 10% of my student loans.
Right.
And so this idea that I'm out grifting and trying to make a buck.
Are people trying to say that?
I've had people say that I'm just like, that I wrote something that's sensational, that I'm trying to just try and attract people to buy a book, and that it's all, it's not. This is 20 years of my adult life spent at the top universities in the world studying this. I spent a large chunk of my existence as a human being, and I poured it into this book. And I don't care if I make $1 on it. I've lost money on it. So I lost probably 20 years of my adult life.
Yeah.
On it. So I this isn't, I'm sacrificial in this. I'm not trying to make money on it. I'm in the wrong business if I'm trying to make money.
Well, that's first of all, 2 things make that such a stupid statement by them, in my opinion. They obviously haven't read the book, because if you're trying to really make a hit controversial book, you would not have used language that was so verbose and complex. Okay. You would have sensationalized and simplified your material. Number 2, why go through an academic publishing company they determine the cost of this thing? You don't even get the chance to. If you self-published and went through Amazon or something like that, you could charge $15, $20 a pop, maybe 25, and really make a profit. You're clearly not attempting to do that. But anyway, I don't know why they make that kind of allegation. It's kind of silly to me.
No, I'm not in this for the money. I'm great. I love having fans and all that. And I love people giving significance to my work. And I really love to see, because I'm a big fan of truth. And so whether I wrote it or not almost is irrelevant. I like to see the truth, clear, clean research getting out there. And so anyway, going back to your original, we don't have time to go through each particular individual in the gallery there, but maybe we could look at a few.
Do you want to go for popular names because people really know, or some that you think are really good? Stop me and be like, hey, listen, let me introduce you to this person you may not know about, but they have a really cool translation trope theme.
Yeah, maybe we could just kind of like off-road over the top of the gallery there and just name some names. So this is the gallery. This is chapter 2. Now this chapter has nothing to, I don't even know if I mentioned Christianity in chapter 2. So I'm not sure I do. I think this chapter, you could lift it out and just give it straight to classicists, and it would be research that they would value. In fact, 3 of my 4 dissertation committee members that helped me write this chapter were top world classicists and didn't have any interest in Christianity per se. Tim Whitmarsh is the top classicist at Cambridge University, helped oversee this chapter. And so
Tim's the man.
He is an outstanding scholar. And several others as well. Carl Galinsky, the world's most famous and well-studied expert on Caesar Augustus, oversaw this chapter. And so,
wow.
Yeah. And so he just passed away a couple years ago, but he's a dear friend as well. And so.
Wow. Okay. So someone asked what the name of the book is: Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity. And thank you. Press 1 if you're enjoying this so far. I really like to see, attention here, letting us know that you're enjoying what's being discussed and people are paying attention. It's a lot of material. So hit that like button. Let's get ready for the ride. All right. Tell me when to stop. How about that? Because there's 77 here, and you've already told me you found more even after publishing this, and others have found some. It's a fascinating ride. Just stop me when you say it's time.
Let me lay down so here's kind of the pattern, the format for each one of these. Go ahead and show it. It's fine. Okay. So they could see.
Yeah.
So at the top there, you'll see source, like Acca Laurentia. So this is the first one. We're not going to get into this one, and that's fine. But it says source there, and then after that, it shows fable. And so in other words, I give like a brief description of the story. And then at the bottom there, it grabs the sub-themes, and that's from that list we were just looking at. It shows which of those sub-themes you'll find present in this particular story. And so you'll see at the top the sources, so you can go look those up on Perseus or in Loeb Classical Library, wherever you want, wherever you can find those sources. And so I've been very explicit in terms of where I'm pulling the stories, and try to be meticulous about checking those references and make sure they're exactly correct. And I try to be extremely fair with my treatment. I'm not trying to put any bent on it at all. The people that oversaw my dissertation wouldn't allow me to put any bent on it. They wanted this to be exactly spot on. So,
okay, again, just so people know, if you ever get the book, source at the top, you know where to look for it if you want to go see it yourself. Fable, practically the story or the myths, because there's usually plural accounts in some way, shape, or form. He'll document that, why that's important. And the sub-theme. The sub-theme takes us back to the 15 examples, if I may, the 15 sub-themes here that you see.
Yeah.
And so you can understand, okay, if you see these signals, any of these examples in the stories, well, he documents those here in the gallery in chapter 2, so you can actually see it for yourself and understand the sub-theme in that particular character, that divinity, that person who's become a god or goddess.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got one here. We won't get into it, but that's Aeneas, one of the most famous individuals in epic writing, right? That's Virgil's Aeneid. And so Aeneas was translated. He had a vanished and missing body. He had a translation that was associated with a river, and he had an odious or dubious alternative account assigned to his story. And so you can go and read those sources. Alcmene is another famous one, that's the mother of Heracles in legend. And you can go and read that. And that's one where they're in the funeral procession. I brought that up a minute ago, actually. They're in the funeral procession carrying her body, and it vanishes, and in its place is left a statue, what's called a colossus. And so they set that up as kind of a venerated statue in near one of the temples there. And so and so she's worshipped as a goddess. And so Alexander the Great, we talked about him already. He wanted to throw himself into the river, the Euphrates. And these are all great ones, and I wish we had time for all of them. But
well, you tell me, and we'll stop for whichever ones you want.
It's okay. I think it would be a bit much for everybody to in our. Antinous, I think that's one that Derek Bennett likes to bring that one out in his research. If you've noticed, he brings that out a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, me and you love some Apollonius and Diana. Come on now.
That's a great one. Yeah. There's some alternative accounts. There's a post-mortem appearance. He has a discussion with folks after he'd already died. He ascends to heaven. There's a couple of accounts. One, he goes into a temple. The doors open automatically and then close behind him, almost like your grocery store or something like that. He's in the temple. Well, they hear singing inside, and then they go running in afterwards, and they can't find anyone in there. There's no sign of anyone in there, so they worship him as a god. Alternative account is he ascends to heaven in front of some people. And so it's very similar to the New Testament in that way, where you've got missing body in Mark, and then you've got ascension narratives in the other Gospels and this kind of thing.
And I think it's worth noting, too, just for some people who may not realize, Eusebius saw so much similarity between these two, kind of like Justin Martyr has to call out the sons of Zeus looking similar to Jesus, that Eusebius is thinking, he wants to postulate that they invented these legends about Apollonius and Diana in order to compete against the Christian cult. So it's so close in his mind, which if you read them, they don't seem to be that identical. They actually do sound like different types of legends, right? That but they're so overlapping in their themes and stuff. Eusebius was like, oh, no. So he had to make an excuse, do apologetics. I'm calling it an excuse because I think it's a big red flag how similar these people are to Jesus.
Well, look at the sub-themes there. Those aren't sub-themes that are special to Jesus. Those are sub-themes that have been going on for centuries prior to Jesus in these stories. And so it's really signaling that. It's signaling that he's part of this larger current of storytelling. And yeah, I'm sure it probably was competitive with the Jesus cult, but you got to realize it's interesting that the Eusebius runs to that excuse or explanation regarding this story, but why doesn't he use the same description or explanation regarding his own worshipped figure?
Right.
Like he doesn't do that with the New Testament and say, hey, it's copying all of these other prior ones. When you get to Justin Martyr, he says that demons were involved in all those prior stories. And again, we can talk about how honest that argument is.
Absolutely. I love Ariadne.
Yeah. We talked about Aristeas of Proconnesus. That's one that we like to land on because it's just fun. He goes into a fuller's shop, and that's like a dry cleaner in the ancient world. Now you got to realize you're hearing Aristeas of Proconnesus. To you hear blah 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 blah. An ancient person, when they heard that name, this was somebody in lights. This was a celebrity of the ancient world. He was a son of a god. He was a wonder worker, very famous. He would have been kind of akin to Jesus to us now. They would have thought of him in that way. He goes all the way back to 6th century BC, and so he's in Herodotus. He's in some of these early sources, and he was a famous miracle worker and divine figure, a philosopher of sorts. And so he goes into this fuller's shop, a dry cleaner, for lack of a better term, a place where you get your laundry done. He goes in there and falls dead on the floor. They check him, he's clearly dead. And the owner of the store locks up and leaves to go inform his family that, hey, Aristeas died. He's dead. And so comes back after traveling and unlocks the place, looks inside and sees that Aristeas is no longer on the floor, dead. He's gone. And then has these travelers come visit that report that they had seen Aristeas on the road and had this discussion with him, this encounter with him, and so forth, and that he was just fine and all this stuff. And then he vanishes, right? So Aristeas vanishes. And then he appears again like 230 years later somewhere else. So he writes a book even. And now he's not eating broiled fish like Jesus, but he does leave behind a literary work. And some people will talk about the physicality of these figures. Yes, they were deified, and that means they had the ability to have physical interactions with the world. They were super physical, not non-physical. And so they had all sorts of physical capabilities, kind of like a superhero would have. And so they were capable of having sex with humans after they had been translated. They were capable of fighting in wars and battles. We have accounts of that. They were capable of writing literary works. And in the case of Jesus, capable of being touched and eating fish and all this kind of stuff. And so these weren't just apparitions or phantoms or something.
Again, I love how old this particular character is in terms of the sources. Ooh, Asclepius. That's a good one.
Super famous. Yeah. And we went over that. In fact, when we read Justin, he talks about Asclepius being struck by the thunderbolt, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a variety of legends around that, and you could read that there in more detail. But he has a translation associated with Zeus's thunderbolt. He ascends to heaven. His translation is post-mortem. He's killed by the thunderbolt, and he has a post-translation appearance, as many appearances. I think you've even featured that on your channel, where Asclepius comes and meets people and helps them heal and stuff after he'd already died. And they also name a star after him and in a couple of the accounts there. And so he's certainly a huge celebrity in the ancient world.
I want to just notice that we're still in the A's. I mean,
So we could roll forward. We're going to get into. There's Augustus. There's so many figures in here you can get into. Actually, I actually reserve. I should say Augustus because I reserve after this list a special treatment for the Caesars, and so in the apotheosis tradition, and so
Castor. There's Castor.
Yeah.
Cleomedes.
He's an Olympic boxer. Actually, those were a kind of celebrity in the ancient world. He climbs into a box. They're chasing him. He climbs into a box. They open the box. Finally, they can't get it open. They open it up, and there's box is empty. And so,
oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, and so they worshipped him as a god at that point. They said, okay.
So funny how that works.
Yeah, it's great. It's great stories though. Yeah.
Daphne.
And some of the lesser ones here, I mean, some of these are people that survive as famous. Some of these were very, very famous in the ancient world and less so now. We talked about Empedocles a minute ago. He's the philosopher that threw himself into the volcano. Yeah, he's a good one.
Yeah. Wow.
Super famous philosopher in the ancient world. Often.
Do you put Lucian's what's his name? My brain is
Proteus?
Yeah, do you put him in here?
I think so. When you get to the P's, he's probably in there.
Okay. I'm just curious.
I had to. I mean, this is me cherry picking. I picked several, not because they align with the New Testament so much, but so much as that they provide a great cross section of all the different kinds and types, the garden variety. And just to show the elasticity of the trope, the various ways that it manifests, the kind of the permutations. There's Heracles, super famous.
Absolutely. And that shows up in Proteus, Peregrinus.
Yeah, he's an archetype for all of this. Him and Romulus are, almost every story in one way or another imitates those two figures.
I love the story though, how here he is, this womanizer, so to speak. He can't help being this bodybuilder of the ancient world, attracted to so many girls, and his wife's not having it. She's pissed. And then here comes the what's it called? The centaur, who's pissed because he had somehow slaughtered, I think, or something happened along the story, right? Where he kills a bunch of them and they want revenge. So he promises her that, this will make him fall in love with you and have no attraction to any other woman. If you just put this on his skin, you're good. And she puts it on his cloak. I think it's the lion's mane that he would usually wear around or something like that. He puts it on and it's it. Like there's no way to cure it. And so he's going to suffer for eternity or die. Yeah. And so he's just like, peace, jumps on a pyre, burns. And then the bones, that's the other interesting part about this. The people went to inspect the fire and they can't find his bones after the fire, which means his body has been taken and translated.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, and he's the quintessential, right? He's one of the earliest in the Mediterranean mythological kind of tradition. So
stop me whenever you want. I'm just scrolling down, and feel free to comment or whatever you want to do here.
Yeah, you'll notice that some of them are Egyptian kind of colored or based. Some of them are more kind of Anatolia. Some of them are more Roman. Some of them are more Near Eastern. Some of them are more Western. Some of them are, but you'll notice that this is all around the entire Mediterranean basin. And so, especially in the Greek East, but also in Latin, Roman history, or the history of Roman culture, rather.
So what would you say? And this is, again, we're looking at the Hall of Fame. My grandparents lived in Cooperstown, New York. They still do. My grandmother's still alive, and she lives literally walking distance. I'd say 5-minute walk to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I've been there several times, and you walk in and you see all the famous Babe Ruth and the various different players throughout history. We're in the Hall of Fame of ancient
There it is.
deified.
Proteus. Proteus. Yeah, boom.
That one's, man, we should do a video where we just go through and read it and everyone can laugh and have a blast with us along the way.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think so. I mean, what's interesting, especially interesting from my standpoint, is that he was one of the top Christian leaders of the 2nd century. He was a super famous guy, and was respected and honored as one of their top writers and teachers.
It says he wrote much of their material.
Yeah,
that's pretty.
Exactly. And so, but you get him satirized by Lucian. He deconverts for whatever reason. I guess he's kind of painted as a charlatan. Deconverts and then decides to host this stunt in Athens. But we don't need to get into all of it. Just enough to know that this is a great story that is super instructive regarding Christian origins. And so,
Pythagoras is huge. Romulus, we're about to jump into him.
Yeah, I want to just highlight, though, that you notice this list, there's famous people here.
Yeah.
These are the most famous. Like, you're not going to find others that don't find their way into this list. This is the Hall of Fame. It's not just kind of, we're not kidding. These are the most famous figures. And so if you wanted to be in the Hall of Fame in Mediterranean antiquity, you need to get yourself onto this list.
Now we're at Roman Imperial. So we've exited the typical with is this Kisithros or something like that? I can't remember how to pronounce it.
Yeah, that sounds as good as any.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and it's right.
Then you get into the Roman, which is closer to home. I mean, we're right here in the Roman Empire, right? Christianity's or growing up here in the Roman Empire. Did you want to deal with this, or did we want to pop forward, or what do you want to do next? Because where do you want to take us since we've looked at the gallery?
So we can mention Romulus. It's enough to say, though, that the Caesars had road encounters, road appearances. There are eyewitnesses that came forward and swore. In fact, it was part of the agenda for the funerary consecration. They would say, okay, now bring forward the witness or witnesses. And there would be some person or body of people that would come forward and swear on oath in front of the entirety of Rome and all the magistrates and the next Caesar and so forth, that the last Caesar, they saw them and met them on the road in their translated state as a demigod. And this was their confession. They were swearing this on oath. I want to just emphasize just how the gravity of that, of swearing an oath in front of Caesar and in front of the Roman Senate. Now, this was playful. They understood. I mean, that a lot of the authors will recognize that they were paid. They were on the payroll to come forward and give these stories. But it's following the tradition of Romulus and Julius Proculus, who also gave a sworn testimony that he had met the deified, translated, having disappeared Romulus on the road, and he gives him a great commission: go ye therefore into all the world, and et cetera, et cetera. And then Julius Proculus steps forward. Now it says that he was a man without guile, that he was not somebody that would tend to, lie or embellish or anything like that. And so his testimony was trusted in some way.
I mean, just think about that though, right? Because like where we were, you and I were both like hook, line, and sinker believers in the fundamentalist perspectives of Christianity. If we heard them try to say that he saw this, right, and our walls were up, we're being defensive, I'd be like, no. How do you know he's trustworthy? Like, I'm willing to question when an ancient source says, and this man had no guile and he was trustworthy to the core. But I would do that with the New Testament, but I wouldn't do it with the Roman literature. I'd be like, man, that's not true. You know what I mean?
No, you'll trust the cult leaders, the founding figures of the movement who are in the backwaters of Galilee, fishermen giving stories. You'll trust them, but you won't trust actual bona fide historians who are recording these stories, like Livy and Dionysius and Dio and all of these writers who record these stories and they're using historiographical methodology as best as it was capable at that time. Now they're admitting oftentimes that these were stories. And so, but nonetheless, these were stories that were held dear and that for over these venerated figures in antiquity. And so there is a special pleading there. And I think a lot of it comes from trying to silo off the religion into Judaism to see all this is, it's almost like there's this wall around Judaism. Like this is where all of the honest truth, raw footage of what really happened kind of stories are told.
Yeah.
And the Mediterranean world, well, that's where all the tall tales and crazy stories are told that are clearly whatever pagan means, and that these people were just, I don't know, drinking Kool-Aid or smoking something and coming up with all kinds of crazy stories. But if that doesn't hold up, because as soon as you look into early Judaism, you see that they're creating stories left and right as fast, if not faster, than the Romans, that you also do not hold as true. You want to read all of the writings from Judaism from 300 BC to 200 CE. Tell me which one of those is giving an honest, clear, accurate account of anything.
I'm thinking we went through the gallery and I was thinking about the Roman road experience that you just talked about. And I'm thinking of Paul's experience on the road. It's, and then the road to Emmaus experience in Luke. And why wouldn't that have been the common trope that you would have used, right? Especially when the scholars were looking at Luke Acts, are realizing like, okay, look at the jab that it constantly points. It blames Jews over and over and over, differentiating Christians from Jews, but then also giving credit to the Romans. Like when the Roman soldiers step in and help them with the mobs that try to kill them and all that, like the Roman soldiers are on their side. And therefore, as someone like John Dominic Crossan might say, Acts is headed to Rome, baby. Acts is headed to Rome. Well, why wouldn't you have a Roman road or a road experience like the common Roman road, Appian Way, eyewitness testimonies in Acts? I mean, and this just goes on and on with this translation fable trope theme that you're talking about.
Yeah, even so, you've got Josephus, who's on the payroll to write stories about the Jews, right? So he writes Antiquities of the Jews. It was very much like Dionysius of Halicarnassus' Antiquities of the Romans. He's modeling it after that in so many ways. He's trying to festoon the Hebrew history, Jewish history, as respectable within kind of within Roman circles. So he's trying to write a bona fide history that can go into their archives and be respected in some way. Well, he's embellishing it to some extent because he can't exit his entire religion in the process by giving, stripping out all of the legendary material. But when he gets to the death of Moses, as you've pointed out, what does he do? He changes the story entirely. This is the most sacred figure in all of Judaism, in all of Hebrew history, right?
Right.
And he takes and changes the story and has him ascend to heaven at the end of it. And so he's taking that liberty, and he must have felt that that was necessary for his Roman readers, for them to have him still on the table as a respected kind of contemporary with the other individuals, the Hall of Fame, so to speak. He wants to get his Moses onto that list.
Again, that's in Against Appian, I believe, where he's competing, it seems, with this Greek author, Appian. And he wants his Judaism. He's arguing for its antiquity, its superiority in terms of its divine and antiquity, its laws. It's competing with Roman law. It's like there's a lot of stuff that's going on in Josephus's apologetics. And then he has the chief central lawgiver, Moses, like you said, not die. Well, hold on. I can open my Bible and say
exactly.
he died right here. So why can he fudge that data? And that is because what's more important is the fact that there is this kind of fluidity, or if you will, this flexibility with tradition when you're dealing with a contemporary context and you're competing with people.
To try and give an analogy, in the Elizabethan era, there were people that would want to have a painting made of them. So they would sit still. And we've talked about this. They would sit still and in their best clothing or whatever, and have a painter come and spend the whole day. They'd have to, make sure that they get restless or whatever. But at the end of it, they would create this ornate frame around this beautiful picture of this person. And they have that framed up on the wall, and this, oftentimes the frame, they would spend just as much time carving that as much care as they put into the painting itself, in this beautiful ornate frame. And they would frame that and put it on the wall. Well, this is the way you would frame a story of someone who was set up in that gallery, in the Hall of Fame, in lights, as someone who was to be given divine significance in the ancient world. And so, yeah, he wants to give Moses that frame. There's already, a birth myth, so to speak, with him. And so he's able to provide that. But the idea that Moses just kind of dies in obscurity at the end of the narrative was unpalatable.
In the birth myth, I heard that even then Josephus changes details that match more with, I don't know if it was Alexander the Great or if it was Romulus and Remus with the birth, but there was something there. We know that the Sargon of Akkad, I believe it is, the old story in Moses seems to have inspired the biblical tale about Moses floating on the river. But there are details about what's going on with Egypt and the Pharaoh and them trying to kill the firstborns that are different in Josephus, that match closer to Greco-Roman sources about some of these details from what I was reading somewhere. I can't remember who or exact details, but there's something interesting that sticks out. Again, your point about this portrait that they're drawing about Moses in the 1st century. And then you go, well, hold on. I didn't know that he had an ascension. He was translated till I met you, and then found out, hold on, Josephus doesn't have him die. He has him taken, like Enoch, like Elijah. Yeah. And who's on a mountain with Jesus in the gospel? Elijah and Moses. Yes. And they're translated with Jesus having
an appearance, an epiphany. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think this is, to me, the case is closed. I don't know. I haven't read, let me put it to you this way. I haven't read a single critique of my book that didn't come from kind of a religious, somebody just upset because it upset their religious sensibilities or their religious affinities or comfort or whatever. I've seen some of that, but I haven't seen a single serious correction to my book by anyone who has anything to say that would really defeat any of the arguments that are in it. And because I think this is obvious, I think, right? I mean, if you've got 50 people that ascended to heaven in the ancient world, or 100, Jesus is on the list. Where else are you going to run with that if you're a scholar? I'm not talking about somebody that teaches at, Peter Pan Theological Seminary or whatever. I'm talking about somebody who's an actual bona fide scholar that's looking at this stuff, a real historian. You're locked into, unless there's some data to really move me off of that direction, this is kind of where we're going with this. And as soon as you get into looking at the details, oh my God, it's vivid. This isn't just some kind of loose kind of crayon sketch. This is a detailed effort to place him within that tradition in story. And so,
yeah. Okay. I figure we go to the Romulus section and get into that quote you were talking about. Where's Romulus? You said it was on page 180, I think. You said 175. So let's get to 175 here. I think there's some good. I think it's chapter 3, if I'm not mistaken. It might be chapter 4. Okay, here it is. Look at that. That's pretty quickly. Okay.
Okay.
So here you are, translation of Romulus and Jesus compared. I cleaned that up just to show you I don't really go into the details on this, though. I just show the 15 translation sub themes. and I show you how many Romulus checks compared to Jesus, Jesus beats Romulus on the Translation Fable, bro. And then they laugh going, that Romulus stuff never happened. A lot of the people that are, friends of mine that are like arguing with me over this stuff, they'll be like, yeah, that's silly. Romulus? Nah, Romulus didn't do it. But literally, he checks off more. And when I went and fact checked the 77 examples, even Heracles, Dionysus, like some of the big head honchos that I would think are like definitely going to check off more than Jesus, right? Yeah. They don't beat him. Jesus has more translation tropes based on your 15 sub-themes than every single one of your 77. And I sat there and chewed on this before I finished that documentary, creating graphs for this. Rick, I was looking to find someone who outdid Jesus on the fables, and Jesus beat him.
Yeah, and I don't think I think that I was extremely honest and fair in that treatment. I had classicists governing me. I had, I don't think that I set up the case in order to like have Jesus fit perfectly or anything like that at all. At all. You go back and read those ancient sources. This is a very honest and fair assessment of what's going on there. And those really are the themes. I'm not moving the goalposts at all. If anything, right. I'm moving away. I'm trying to disprove my case to some extent. And Jesus still lands in there in spades.
It's crazy, man. I was like, okay, there's very few he doesn't check off. The river, Zeus's thunderbolt, and then him having an eponymous etiology. But everything else, I mean, he's even known to be a star, the what is it, the bright morning star? I mean, like there's so many things that he catches, he literally checks off in this. It's huge. Okay. Sorry, I know I interrupted you. Did you want to go through this briefly with Romulus and give like the examples?
Just enough to say that I identify in the book and argue that there's imitation going on directly from the Romulan story into the New Testament. And so you could see that case there. And I think it's very strong. By skipping over that, I'm not diminishing that case. It's just as for the sake of time. Yes. But I think that case is pretty airtight if you start looking at all that I have in that, especially in that particular table. But here's the quote from Arnobius. Now, again, we're dealing with another apologist. This is around 300. So this is the 4th century. So we dealt with Justin. That was the middle of the 2nd century. He was born in the 1st century and writing in the 2nd century. Here you have someone that's writing around the year 300. This argument didn't go away. And you don't see, to the contrary, this case being made for the historicity of Jesus' resurrection at all. The earliest Christians are not making that case. They're not even endeavoring it. And so, but here's what we have. This is, again, one of the top apologists from the 3rd century, Arnobius, super famous guy, one of the highest intellectuals of early Christianity. Here's what he had to say. Father Romulus himself, who was torn in pieces by the hands of 100 senators, do you not call him Quirinus Martius? That is a deity's name, kind of like Jesus Christ in some way. Do you not honor him with priests and divine couches? And do you not venerate him in your most spacious temples? And in addition to this, do you not confess, notice the word there, confess, that he has ascended into heaven? Either, therefore, you too are to be laughed at, who regard as gods men slain by the most heinous executions, or if there is sure ground for your thinking that you should do so, allow us too to feel assured for what causes and on what grounds we do this.
So break that down for the audience in a simple way. What is going on there?
Basically saying, Romulus is the founder of the entire empire. And so he's the guy, right? Romulus and Remus. That's where the Roman Empire originated. He's the originary guy. Basically, he's saying you're worshiping this guy in temples and paying homage to him, somebody that had been supposedly torn in pieces by senators, by his closest confidants, killed, executed, assassinated. And And don't you, and yet you declare that he ascended to heaven and that he's a God to be worshiped. And you bring forward sworn eyewitnesses to this and testimonies. And you confess this in front of each other. You have confessions where you say, yes, Father Romulus ascended to heaven and this kind of thing. This is part of the confessions of the emperor cult. And basically the apology there is leave us alone then, because we're doing the same thing as you are. It's basically don't kill us, because look at what you're doing. You're doing the exact same thing with your guy.
Wow. Okay. If we may, let me just show the pictures again. And then I wanted to shift gears to a topic that you and I usually have on the phone. But here's Jesus and Romulus. We just went through, if you get the book, he goes into the arguments, just showing you Jesus has more checked off. So when it comes to translation fables, Jesus, with all the material we have, he checks off more. I imagine if we had all of the ancient sources, because we've lost quite a bit, there might be some runner-ups who check off more or as many as Jesus. The question I have too for you, Rick, when you came up with these 15, and I imagine you gathered these from classicists and other scholars along the way to recognizing a lot of this material, are there more than 15 sub-themes that you maybe are blind to or haven't discovered that you know of?
I think I'm pretty thorough, but that said, that doesn't mean that I'm dogmatic about it. I in fact, the posture in my book is come study this more. I'm laying the foundation. I want to invite more people to investigate this and that's happened. You've noticed several other scholars jumping in and writing books along these lines. Robin Faith Walsh, M. David Litwa, a variety of scholars now are recognizing this research. Obviously, Dennis R. MacDonald and others that have been on your show. And I have several other people that are scholars, academics that follow me on Facebook and academia and other places that are also following this research and taking it further than I have in the past. And so this is an open topic of discussion. I don't want to like stake it out as, okay, this is Miller's topic and no one else is allowed to be here. It's like my turf or something like that. Because it's too important for that kind of nonsense. And so, so in that sense, yes, I think you can go in, and this is just the way I chose to slice the pie based upon things that I kept seeing a recurring cluster of themes that were in these stories, and not in every one of them. There's no particular theme that seems to be in everybody's story, but it's this cluster that gave the ancient reader the cognition to be able to recognize that they're reading a translation fable and what that meant. Right. When they came across that in their text, they understood how to process that based upon these signals, literary signals in the text. Okay, this is one of those kinds of stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Just like our phone conversations, this is the struggle that I find. Even when Dennis MacDonald had a great conversation with friend and colleague, and yet critical of his mimesis criticism pertaining to Mark imitating Homer, direct imitation rather than it being window dressing. And I'm having a hard time. Carl Olaf Sandnes. Yeah. And they had a wonderful conversation, and I'm like going along like a fly on a wall. And then I hear this moment come where Carl makes this comment and he says, doesn't mimesis create distance between you and the history of what actually happened, right? And then they both agree, yes, if it's imitating, it's creating a distance between what actually happened, what you're reading on the page, and what actually occurred, if anything did occur at all. And I said, this is my struggle. My struggle is I can go and interview Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman could say, now that happened. That's history. He was on the hill. He said those words. That's the thing, or whatever, whatever it might be. And then I'll read another scholar who comes along and goes, nah, Moses sat on a hill and said the same stuff. And in that context, you find also a miracle, which makes red flags that this didn't happen probably historically. You wouldn't do that for Asclepius or other characters. You don't grant them the historicity when they're doing mythical or miracle things. So all of this work that you're bringing forward to show in a literary sense, whoever wrote these stories clearly is modeling it after the linguistic furniture of the fable world, from the Greco-Roman world, which covers everything from Egypt, even Persia. I mean, you're talking like it's all over the Mediterranean, into Africa, up into Europe. It's all the way, it's even outside of Rome into Persia, Middle East, if you will. Like, everybody's influenced by this stuff. So how do we approach the Gospels? Because someone like you might say, look at the fictive. I mean, there's so much of it. How can you trust what's actually history here? How can you even play the game of finding out what happened? Others like to play that game and pretend that you can just Thomas Jefferson your New Testament, and find what happened. Oh, well, he didn't. Yeah. That didn't happen. Nope, that didn't happen. Here it is. He was a Jew. He's on a mountain. He said something to some guys. They went to Jerusalem. Crap get ugly. He got killed. He died. Boom. And then they made up that he rose again from the dead or something. Like if they want to rationalize. What do you do in your mind? Because no one knows what actually is the case.
Oh yeah, I think the mundane figure is to pursue that. There's a couple things there. Like, you want to worship, like if you're talking about somebody that's going to be celebrated in religious legends and storytelling, well, welcome to the party. You've got that with every world religion, and even the small ones and the big ones. You've got that legendary quality to it all, and usually unashamedly so. I mean, if you go to the early Buddhist literature, who was Buddha? Is he even findable in the as you sift through all of those documents? It's a fool's errand to try and uncover who that was. And you get to the point where you throw up your hands and you say, okay, well, that must then not have been even the point. They didn't care a whole lot about preserving the, some kind of accurate memory of that Shakyamuni Buddha. That was not the goal. Was the preservation of that, the warts and all kind of actual person. And do you really want that person anyway? I mean, do you really want to know that L. Ron Hubbard, got a parking ticket and, had the gout and, or Joseph Smith, his personal, no, you don't found a religion on, at least that's not been historically what's happened. It's founded on myth, legend, storytelling, folk beliefs. And so that's the ticket. That's the entryway. If you want to become a Christian, what do you have to do? You got to believe some things. It's not knowing historical facts. It's believing stories. It's believing early religious storytelling from the particular religion. And so it's the same with every religion. You're gonna indulge in some stories. It's kind of at the front door with all of them. And so I think that's the problem. And then you've got historians that are trying to crack that open and find something at the bottom of it all. Right. Kind of like the historical King Arthur. Sorry, he's lost. You're not going to find him. You can play with that. And I don't think it's necessarily off the table as a pursuit, but I think we just got to be honest with, we're dealing with data that's working against us all day. And so if you want to, and so this idea that we're going to have this pilgrimage to find, this quest for the man, if we interrogate the text long enough and hard enough, somehow he's going to come forward and introduce himself to us, and we're going to figure it all out.
That you said that in your book very, very well when you're talking about Alexander the Great. I think it was Alexander the Great, or it may have been one of the Caesars, but you said something like that. You said something like classicists even fall for this, where they want to sift through the legendary material to find the actual Alexander the Great. And you have multiple accounts of this guy, right? And you're like, and they want to play this game like we can know, as if these authors were writing that kind of historical account. So we anachronistically are trying to solve this what happened question. And we're given these accounts on not what happened, but a romanticized image of that particular author's view of things and what they want to sell you, so to speak. So that's why you have 4 different accounts that don't align pertaining to the Gospels, or several different biographical accounts of Alexander the Great that don't align and contradict one another. And so, like, I'm just thinking to myself, what the hell happened? And what do you think happened? Or do you not go on that pursuit?
I think that it's a fool's errand. I think well, I shouldn't say that. I think for certain individuals that want to try and get down to the bottom of it, okay, fine. But I think you've got to be extremely honest with yourself, like what your intentions are and what the data really is, and be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty on a lot of levels. I think what we can be certain of, though, is he doesn't look like what we get in the New Testament at all. And so what we're getting there is a layer cake of all sorts of different creative storytelling and cult foundational material that's meant to craft their founding figure in a certain way that's able to achieve something for them as a community. It's not meant to preserve this like raw footage of, this isn't Bigfoot, or, like we've got footage of Bigfoot, here in this, or whatever. It's not footage of actual ontological events in time and space that you're reading there. It's picking up on the story itself is telling you so, because it's picking up on all of these legendary and mythic and literary motifs left and right in there. And it's crafting the story, leveraging all of that left and right in terms of its storytelling and its intentionality in the narrative. And so that's the modality of the text, is telling you how to read it. It's not telling you to read it as history. And so
it doesn't feel like that when I'm reading it either. It doesn't feel like I'm reading something that's historical. It feels more like it's trying to nourish you or make you cherish a narrative that's powerful, a storytelling with its omniscient author and so many other key elements that make it obvious the author's intent. But the other thing that really gets me is that, where do you draw that line of what happened and what didn't? And this is what Carl was saying when he was talking to Dennis about this, because you could tell Carl had more of that pursuit. Dennis is like, good luck. It would take a miracle to know what happened, because, granting the whole mimesis of Elijah and Elisha with Mark between Jesus and Elijah and Elisha, but then you got the Greco-Roman stuff too. And it's like, oh, wow. How do you get all this gone? So I figure we blast through the super chats, if that's cool with you. Yeah. And I love this. I thank you for your time and joining me again. I hope people will get the book. Shameless plug, but I love my brother here, and I really want to get more people acquainted with resurrection and reception and early Christianity. The link is in the description, and it's my Amazon affiliate link. So it always helps me out if you purchase a copy of the book. It adds up over time. Eventually, I could fill the gas tank with Amazon's income. Kevin, thank you so much for the $10. I really appreciate that. I didn't get to announce it earlier, but thank you so much. Diamond Encrusted Abdullah, thank you again for the super chat. Islamic prophecies of Judgment Day are true. Baal wrote Torah, and Quran war, game god of war. Baal is Zeus, god of thunder, evil. He created us in lab.
Okay.
Hold on. Hold on 1 second, bro. Hold on 1 second, bro. That's a little bit much, man. I'd like to see some data that actually shows any evidence of that. But anyway, I gotta say thanks for the super chat now. Can't argue with the super chat, but I have to say that's some like ancient alien stuff, my friend. Man, Bear Pig. Look, Miller's like, no comment. Man, Bear Pig, thank you for the super chat and for being a member of the channel. I really appreciate it. Justin Martyr, Apology, chapter 21, flat out says Jesus is no different from the sons of Zeus, Hermes, Asclepius, Dionysus, Heracles, etc.
That is right. Thank you for posting that, Man Bear Pig. I appreciate you doubling down on what already has been said. Is the Greek there is unambiguous also. There's nothing new is what it says there in Greek. And the Greek there's no wiggle room out of that. He means that exactly. And a lot of people have tried to discredit Justin because it's funny, people running away from the earliest apologists for the religion, trying to argue, because I guess it's so unsettling what he's saying there. But he's saying there's nothing new, nothing, not one thing.
I think, and if someone watching this were to get technical, the only thing he differentiates Jesus on compared to them is not the mythic and the legendary. It's that he's more moral. That's the only thing he does at the end of the day is he goes, well, those were evil and immoral because they were philosophically minded, right? And they wanted whatever's more moral and more good is truer to them. And so that's the only thing I would say he tries to differentiate, but they are the same in type, if that makes sense. And content.
Yeah, that's right.
JC, thank you so much for the super. Did prideful Saul become low? I don't know this term. As Paul small? Do you have a comment on that? This is Acts. It clearly seems to be implying Acts, where Saul is renamed into Paul. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. He has his conversion story there, and they rename him. A lot of the earliest Christians end up taking on different names. You notice that kind of trend that the apostles are Cephas. Is he the rock? I don't know. Did that come from, was that a nickname he had before he converted in the story legends? I don't know. This kind of thing. But and then you also get kind of this identity shifting idea that, that we're all brothers and this kind of thing, that you abandon your family, you hate your father and mother, even even radicalizing it this kind of way. And so you end up kind of disowning your past in some sense, a conversion in that way, you're reborn. This, I think, is a pattern that you could see phenomenologically across the earliest texts of individuals who find a new identity in the religion in some way. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's going on in the storytelling, the early legends around Paul.
Yeah, and I think me and JC share this idea that it's mimesis about King Saul, who's attacking the seed of David, which is David, just like the old stories, and that he's going from king to low, humble. I think there might be a mythic trope there. Diamond Encrusted Abdullah is back. Jesus extraterrestrial, just like Hubal.
Huh. I'm not sure what that is.
I don't either. Thank you for the super chat, my friend. JC, is there anything about combs and hair? Comments. Combs and hair. Comments. Is there anything about combs and hair? I don't know. Is this within the Translation Fable trope stuff? I imagine.
I'm not sure what's meant by the combs and hair, but the comets, I mean, that's Julius Caesar.
That's true.
Yeah. So he's identified, that's the catasterism, identifies the comet that's flying through the sky and this kind of thing.
Diamond Encrusted Abdullah is back again. Thank you for the super chat. Hubal is in charge of U.S., UK, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. His throne is cube at Mecca. Hubal is Zeus god of Syria and Rome god before polar shift. War with Lord Rama. Real history hidden by Saudi agents. Money, 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 money.
I don't know.
I don't either. Look, you know something no one knows. I really appreciate the super chat. JC, if God's feet stand on and I cannot read the Greek here, in heaven, could it be a comet if that root is related to the Akkadian Sipru, point B, comma?
There, I don't understand the question exactly.
God's feet stand on I suspect it's a footstool in heaven or something. I don't know. Maybe something in heaven. I don't know the Greek, so I really don't know. Let me look and see if JC's helping us out here.
Point, beak, coma. I'm not sure.
JC,
I don't normally associate New Testament stuff with Akkadian because I feel like there's such a gap there that the ancient mind wouldn't have made that leap.
yeah. Well, I try to see. Let me move forward here. We got a couple more. Rick, does a comet look like a shofar? Chauffeur.
I think JC's wanting to do comet research. So I would suggest looking at the catasterism themes in my book, and also specifically looking at the legends around Julius Caesar and the competitive games where Augustus stands up and points to a comet in the sky and says that that's the deified Julius ascending to heaven. It's kind of an interesting, but I don't know that you're trying to relate that to my research specifically. And so I'm making a presumption there regarding the chauffeur and all that.
He said Exodus 24:10, and they saw, and I'm reading in English from my buddy crossbible.com, Stephen Nelson's, and they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. Yeah, I was just reading it out loud because he was giving me more updated information about that. Okay, the mother frickin' Windyberg, thank you so much for the super chat. Good to see you in the chat. Will his book be an Audible at some point?
Yeah, mother frickin'. That is awesome. I love that.
I know, right?
You know, that would be cool. I wonder if you got it in digital form, if you could tell it to read. I think which one of the platforms will read it for you? I think there's a couple of them that'll just read it for you. I know you can throw it into like ChatGPT if you had a copy of it that way and have it read it out loud to you. But no, I'm not aware that that's the case. I'd love that to be the case. So I bet you eventually that any and all books will be readable that way, or audible in that way. But at this point, no, it's not.
Now you do plan future public, like you do have books in your mind in the works that you're interested in potentially putting together or something down the road, right?
Yeah, I've got a book that actually I'm working on right now. I've been putting together notes for it right now, and so and it'll be more popular level. It'll be more, accessible and readable for folk who just want to climb into this discussion. And so it'll be a little less off-putting than the original book there. So
sounds good. Maybe when we cross that bridge, we'll figure out to also put it on Audible so that someone can listen to it. Because I know Wendy she trucks, and so she can listen while driving. It'd be helpful.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I apologize. I wish I could give you something. That would be great.
Yeah. And then she says, and thank you again for another one. Christians did the ancient equivalent of hold my beer.
That's good.
Thank you so much, Wendy. The hockey guy, thank you for the super chat. Dr. Miller, do we see any of these parallels show up in the so-called Gnostic writings?
Yeah. Now the problem there is that they're Platonizing in the Gnostic texts, and so the objective with Jesus then is to shed the body, right? Not to have physicality, because in Plato's paradigm, the idea is that the body's an encumbrance, that it's weighing you down, that if you could somehow, if the soul can somehow leave the corruptible body, then you would be able to transcend the kind of the lower nature, so to speak. And so it's the journey of the soul. And this kind of thing is central, a centerpiece in Gnosticism, and that harks back to a centerpiece in Platonic philosophy generally. And so it's sort of like an Jewish occultic stew of that kind of thinking that's going on in the early Christian Gnostic literature. And so in that way, so there are stories, but the idea that what they're interested in mostly, if you read Gnostic texts, like say On the Resurrection is a Gnostic text, you go in there and read it. So surprisingly, not anything much about Jesus, like an event in a literary sense regarding Jesus, but more fussing over and worried about what the nature of the body is.
Right.
And so this kind of endless fascination with that discussion, because it's more philosophically oriented. And so, and trying to fashion Jesus within those kind of philosophically attuned circles. And so, yeah.
Thank you. And then the final one that I have is the Mukunda Raghavan. Forgive me, my brother. He's interviewed me recently on his channel, so make sure you subscribe. He says, do you see any influence of Eastern, aka Indian thought in the Bible?
I do actually. And so we can unpack a lot. I think there's actually quite a bit. And so in some ways you could see there's a major trade deficit in Roman time with India and the East and Persia, a major trade deficit. And so there's a fascination with the East that's going on. Derek and I have talked about this quite a bit. And so you see the trade routes. You've got the Silk Road that's coming straight through all of that, that area there from as far out as China and so forth. But a lot of it's coming from, the Middle East, from India and from Persia. And there's also shipping routes that are coming up through into Egypt from India and moving a lot of product through there. And so we've got all sorts of archaeological and textual evidence of that, just truckloads of product coming in. So especially people that could afford that, it was fashionable to have that kind of pottery and other kinds of things, incense and things from the East, from India. It's fashionable to have art and also and along with that, cultural commerce was an interest in Indic thinking generally, and Indic religion and Indic Eastern kind of philosophical idea. And so the East influenced the Greek philosophical tradition heavily. Almost all the philosophers in one sort of there's a lot of them anyway that end up in legend as having traveled to the East or learned from someone from the East, or at least from Egypt, if not from further East. And so you even get that with Paul. He goes to the East, to Arabia, and has supposedly, he doesn't consult with the apostles, but instead has this kind of Eastern, like ascetical kind of journey east, and this kind of thing. Right. And you get that with Apollonius of Tyana, where he travels his whole story is his adventure to the East. And so anyway, so you get into the New Testament, you've got things like, I think even the walking on water. You notice in Buddhist tradition and Indic tradition, if you meditate long enough, you can actually achieve what's called the fourth jhana, and that is the ability, you can walk through walls, you can walk on water. There's a few different things you can do once you do that. And you notice in that story that what's Jesus doing? He's praying all night, whatever praying all night means. He's sitting on the mountain. It sounds a lot like meditating. And then he comes out kind of like in nirvana or whatever and walks on the water, right? To the disciples, and you get that famous scene. And so I think that legend is playing on and riffing on some of those stories that are percolating in the East. And
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I love it. Mukunda will be on the channel at some point, and he has quite a bit of knowledge about the East and their myths and their stories and their philosophy, and I'm hoping to unravel that with him on the channel. So be sure to subscribe. Don't worry, brother. I'm going to be reaching out to you soon. It's been a long week, and I'm just now getting back in the grind. Diamond Encrusted Abdullah, a few more. Sorry, they popped in, Dr. Miller. Baal brought a cult to this planet from Andromeda. Thank you for the super chat. Man Bear Pig, thank you again for the super chat. Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity is the first book I have bought in a while. Love Dr. Miller's work. Could listen to you guys talk for days.
Thanks, Man Bear Pig. You're awesome. I don't know what your actual name is. I don't think it's probably Man Bear Pig, but I like your handle.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate it. Diamond Encrusted Abdullah says, Pinnacle is Venus, movement created by him. Thank you again for the super chat. JC, any stories involving a distaff?
Not sure what he means.
Yeah, well, JC, what's a distaff?
I'm going to have to get out my chat GPT and ask.
Right. Let me see this. Distaff. A stick or spindle onto which wool or flax is wound for spinning.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. There's probably some tie he's trying to kind of research out there.
So there's
I don't recall that, but I'll keep my eyes open.
But there's also, it means the female branch or side of a family. relating to or being a woman, the distaff side of the family. So I'm not sure what they exactly mean. Again, that's why I thought that was a good question to ask you, is like, are there potentially more elements that could be added to that list?
I think so. I think it's certainly an open discussion where people are welcome to go in there and discover. The more I pulled on that thread, the more I discovered. So keep pulling on it.
Keep pulling on it. JC, sorry we couldn't help with a lot of the questions. I really appreciate everybody in the chat. Dr. Miller, while you give us your final words, I want to share the screen with people and show them your book and all that. So if you don't mind. What's your book? Tell us more about the book and stuff.
Yeah, so this was my research. It originated at Yale University with some papers that I wrote there. Took it in as my doctoral thesis here at the Claremont Colleges. Wrote this under a variety of top leading figures and had interactions. And you'll see there in the opening that my interactions were top-ranked people. And so I made every effort because I knew that I was on to some very important research and I wanted to involve the best and brightest. I couldn't involve everyone, but luckily or fortunately, this research is now read at some of the top universities and is regarded as informative and has shaped a lot of the way people are now understanding the resurrection legends in the earliest Christian texts. And so if you want to get into that, if you want to really know what happened, this book is I think the strongest effort, in my opinion, the best effort at doing that. Now, I'm not a religious guy, and so if you're looking for a book that's going to soothe your religion or even hostile to religion, if you're looking for an atheist kind of vehement kind of treatment, that's not this either. It is an academic monograph that's aimed at field specialists and individuals who are immersed in ancient texts. And so this would be a deep dive into that. And so if that interests you. Now, if you're not quite ready for that, Derek and I have made a whole bunch of videos on here. And so I want to invite you to go and watch those as well, because there I think we unpack much of the content in various ways that are understandable and easy to digest. And so
again, I'll put the link to the documentary. It covers your book, a lot of your book, but it's not, there's so many footnotes and sources that you really want to go check. But there's the video. It is a 4-hour, 35-minute video. His book is dense, a lot of material, a lot of reading on my part, having to do this. And it's got quite a bit of views. So it turned out to be quite a good video, I think, for 330,000 views in 1 year. And thank you for your time again, Dr. Miller. I really appreciate you, and I hope more people will get the book. Like this video, share this video. I hope you enjoy this content. This is a niche topic. There are some people who are interested in this, but the way that you keep this kind of material coming out and doing these things is to share this material, show your appreciation to the academics and their work. As you were pointing out earlier, I didn't actually get the chance to say this, but when people were accusing you of, oh, you're just trying to make popular level and trying to make money and all that. No, the reason why we promote and shamelessly plug these academics and why I do it is even the amount of time it takes me to edit a documentary, which could take me up to a month. I did one on my baptism video that flopped, and it's so much good information, but I realized it harmed my overall analytics on the channel. I thought after 1 month, I'll have this awesome documentary. It's over 3 hours, and it's going to blow up and get 1 million views, and it'll help pay off for my family and the hard work. It didn't. And there's something unique and special about when people actually read the hard work that people like Dr. Miller put in and show that appreciation by commenting, emailing, messaging, dropping a comment, putting a review. It lights a fire under our asses, I'll put it that way, to want to do more and to bring more. So we ask for the encouragement. We could use it. And we always want to encourage you too, as much as we can. So thank you, Dr. Miller.
Thank you, sir. It's good being on the channel again. Good hanging out with you, Derek. Love you, man.
Love you too, bro. And never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.